기대어 very blind 그 한밤에
Radio Dawn. I've wanted to tell you this for a very long time. Strange hour to be awake.
You're Chickle.
You are truly beautiful.
Maybe. But sometimes midnight feels more alive than the day ever could.
I know what you mean. The world grows quiet, and in that silence, it almost feels like it is waiting for you to listen.
Do you think it will rain tonight?
I hope not. I prefer the moon. What brings you here tonight?
I come here when sleep will not find me. It's the only time the world doesn't demand anything from me.
I find myself wandering for the same reason. Midnight has a way of making us honest with ourselves. Ha!
I just have never felt this way before.
I know.
I loved those books, the poems I whispered only to the stars. I'm just so glad you understand.
It's a simple truth, but often the most profound.
When words failed me, colors gave me solace.
I'm always searching for places like this, where nature speaks louder than the world's chaos. I feel like our conversation could go on forever.
Indeed, it feels timeless. It feels like a lifetime since we last spoke.
It does, but some things never change. So, what are we going to do now?
We will see what the morning brings.
The river kept flowing quietly beside them, its gentle current mirroring the rhythm of their conversation, and though the night stretched on, neither seemed eager for it to end. By now, the cafe had gone completely silent, its staff having disappeared into the shadows, leaving the two of them alone with nothing but the hum of the street lamps and the whisper of the breeze. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with a kind of fascination she couldn't quite explain. Every word he spoke felt deliberate yet effortless, as though he had spent his life gathering thoughts just to release them here, in her company. There was something magnetic about the way he carried himself, not in arrogance but in quiet confidence, the kind that made her want to listen longer, to peel back the layers of silence and discover every hidden corner of him. He, in turn, found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, noticing the way her lips curved when she smiled, the way her eyes seemed brighter when she spoke of her dreams, and how her voice carried a melody even in the simplest of words. She was not merely someone passing through his night, she was quickly becoming the very reason the night itself felt unforgettable. As the hours slipped away, their words began to grow softer, more vulnerable. The shield of polite introductions had long since fallen, leaving them exposed in the most human way, two souls confessing truths they had never dared to share elsewhere. She admitted how loneliness sometimes clung to her, how the world felt too loud and yet too empty all at once, and he listened with a gentleness that made her heart ache. In return, he spoke of his own solitude, of how he often painted until dawn not out of inspiration but because sleep felt like a stranger to him. "Maybe we're both a little broken," she whispered, half to herself, and he shook his head gently, his eyes holding hers. "Not broken," he corrected softly, "just waiting for the right piece to fit." The words hung between them like a promise, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. The silence that followed was not the heavy kind but electric, charged with something neither of them dared to name. Her fingers, resting loosely on the table, brushed against his when she reached to move her empty cup, and the contact sent a shiver racing through her veins. He didn't pull away. Instead, his hand lingered near hers, as if acknowledging the unspoken question between them. Did they dare close the distance? Did they dare let this fragile thread turn into something more tangible? She looked up, meeting his eyes, and in them she saw the same battle she felt inside herself, a pull too strong to resist, yet too delicate to rush. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it, but instead of retreating, she let her hand remain there, close enough that their warmth mingled. For the first time that night, words failed them. The conversation gave way to the language of silence, where glances spoke louder than sentences, and the steady rhythm of their breaths filled the space between. She noticed the way the moonlight softened the sharpness of his features, how the shadows carved around his cheekbones seemed to emphasize the tenderness in his eyes. He noticed the vulnerability in her gaze, the quiet strength in the way she held herself, and the undeniable spark that flickered every time their fingers grazed. Midnight had drawn them together, but it was something deeper, something older, that held them there, as though fate itself had been waiting for this exact collision of souls. Neither of them said it out loud, but both knew, this was no ordinary meeting. This was the kind of night that carved itself into memory, the kind that shifted the trajectory of lives without warning. And as they sat together, hearts quietly entwining, they both realized they no longer felt like strangers, they felt like something much closer, something the universe had only just begun to write. The hours slipped past unnoticed, the clock somewhere in the distance ticking its way toward dawn, yet neither of them cared. They were suspended in a world of their own making, where time had no power and the only thing that mattered was the presence of the other. Her laughter, soft and unguarded, had become the rhythm of the night, and his voice, deep and steady, the melody that carried it. The river reflected the pale shimmer of the moon above, and it felt as though the entire city had been draped in silence just to give them this moment. She leaned forward slightly, her chin resting on her hand as she watched him speak, captivated not just by his words but by the way he existed, composed yet vulnerable, steady yet filled with unspoken longing. Every second spent in his presence peeled away another layer of her defenses, until she felt as though he could see her for who she truly was, without the need for masks or pretenses. And strangely, instead of fear, she felt relief. For once, she didn't have to pretend. The closeness between them had shifted now, growing heavier, more tangible. When he leaned forward to make a point, his face drawing closer to hers, she could feel the faint warmth of his breath, and the space between them seemed impossibly small. Her heart raced, her thoughts a blur, and for the first time in years she felt that thrilling, terrifying awareness of wanting something she could not control. His eyes lingered on her lips for just a heartbeat too long, and she knew he felt it too, the pull, the magnetic force that tied them together with invisible threads. He hesitated, as though fighting a silent battle inside himself, and she smiled faintly, sensing his restraint. "You're afraid," she whispered, her voice carrying more courage than she felt. He looked at her, startled by her perception, then chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Not afraid," he replied, his voice low, almost hushed. "Just careful. Some things are too important to rush. His words settled deep inside her, both calming and igniting her all at once. She admired his patience, the way he valued this fragile connection as something worth protecting rather than something to consume in haste. And yet, that very restraint only deepened her desire, made her lean closer, drawn to him like the tide to the shore. Their hands finally met, no hesitation this time, as his fingers gently intertwined with hers. The contact was electric, not the spark of something new but the steady warmth of something that felt destined. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sensation ground her, letting herself believe that this was real and not some dream conjured by the night. They sat like that for a while, speaking less, feeling more. Their silence was no longer filled with uncertainty but with comfort, as though words would only interrupt the purity of what was unfolding. He watched her with a kind of reverence, memorizing the curve of her cheeks, the softness of her eyes, the way the moonlight kissed her skin. And she, in return, memorized him, the quiet strength in his posture, the gentle kindness etched into his smile, the subtle tremor in his hand that betrayed how deeply this moment stirred him. For both of them, the night had transformed from an ordinary passing of hours into a sanctuary where they could finally be seen, finally be held without ever needing to explain why. But then, as the horizon began to whisper of the sun's return, a bittersweet awareness crept in. The faintest light brushed the edges of the sky, threatening to unravel the cocoon of midnight they had so carefully built. She glanced at it, her chest tightening, and he followed her gaze. Neither spoke at first, but the same thought weighed on them both. What happens when the night ends? She drew in a breath, trying to steady herself, and said softly, "It feels like the world will take this away the moment the sun rises." He squeezed her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her skin as if to reassure her. "The world doesn't get to decide what this is," he murmured. "Not the sun, not the dawn, not anyone but us." His words carried a certainty that anchored her trembling heart, yet she couldn't stop the ache of knowing their magic belonged to the night. And as the first blush of morning crept across the horizon, they both held tighter to each other, unwilling to let go, unwilling to let the spell break even though they knew it must. The first rays of dawn stretched timidly across the sky, painting it with soft shades of gold and lavender, and with it came the undeniable reminder that their night was slipping away. The city began to stir in the distance, the low rumble of an early bus, the faint footsteps of a worker beginning his day, the hush of wind carrying with it the promise of routine returning. Yet here, on the quiet balcony by the river, they remained frozen in their own fragile world, as though time itself was reluctant to touch them. She looked at him, really looked, memorizing every detail, his dark hair slightly tousled by the night breeze, the gentle strength in his gaze, the faint smile at the corner of his lips that carried both comfort and longing. A knot formed in her chest as the question she had been avoiding pressed harder against her heart. Was this moment destined to fade with the stars, or was it the beginning of something lasting? She feared asking aloud, afraid the answer might unravel the magic. But silence was heavy now, heavier than it had been all night, and she knew the dawn demanded honesty. He was the one who broke it, his voice steady yet tinged with something raw. "I don't want this to end." His admission was quiet, almost fragile, but it struck her like a spark in the dark. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her lips trembling into a smile. "Neither do I," she confessed, her eyes glistening with the emotion she could no longer hide. They both fell silent again, not from hesitation but from the weight of knowing this was no longer a fleeting encounter. The night had given them more than just a conversation, more than just warmth in the face of loneliness. It had given them each other, in a way that felt undeniable. Still, fear lingered at the edges of her heart. Could something so sudden, so unplanned, survive the harsh light of day? She voiced the thought, her words shaky, vulnerable. What if this was only meant to exist in the night? He leaned closer then, closing the small distance between them, his hand lifting to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. The touch was tender, reverent, as though she were something precious he had been waiting for all his life. "Then let the night teach us," he said softly, his eyes locked on hers. "Because I don't believe in coincidences. I believe the universe doesn't waste its time bringing two people together unless it has a reason." His conviction settled into her bones, dissolving the fear, replacing it with a warmth that spread through every corner of her being. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe not in chance, but in fate. She reached up, her hand finding his, holding it against her cheek. Their closeness grew unbearable, and finally, after hours of circling the truth, he closed the space between them. The kiss was not hurried, not desperate, but slow, deliberate, filled with all the words they hadn't spoken. It was the seal of a promise born under the silver moon and carried into the dawn. Her heart raced, her breath caught, and yet in that moment she felt utterly still, as though the world itself had paused to honor them. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, and she laughed softly through the tears that had gathered in her eyes. "I was right," she whispered. He smiled, brushing his thumb against her hand. "About what?" She looked into his eyes, her voice steady now, certain. "That midnight is more alive than the day ever could be." He chuckled, pulling her into his arms, and the embrace felt like home. Around them, the day continued to awaken, but neither paid it any mind. Their world was no longer bound to the hours of the clock or the rising and setting of the sun. What had begun as a fragile thread woven in silence had now become something unbreakable, a bond stitched into their very souls. The night had not ended with goodbye, nor had the dawn stolen their magic, it had only illuminated it, revealing what had always been there, waiting for them. And as they stood hand in hand, watching the morning light spill across the river, they both knew this was not the end of their story but the first chapter of something infinite. Midnight had been their beginning, but love would be there forever.